If you can draw a stick person, you can draw a dynamic figure. Yes, it's true, and I'll show you how with the GSL method and some examples from a timed figure drawing practice. If we've never met before, I'm Fei, a figurative artist, instructor, and founder of Wing Canvas Art School. I've been practicing and teaching figure drawing for over 20 years and coined the acronym GSL to help me remember the 3 steps to easily break down a complex pose into something anyone can draw.
I like to use 3 different colors when I'm drawing. Okay, so in the first minute, you are focusing on the gesture. So gestures are basically like scribbly stick figures. So I tend to avoid outlining unless you're drawing a shape. We are just focusing on the action. It doesn't need to look perfect. So what are the most basic lines that you can put to tell your story? So every gesture is going to be slightly different. I generally, mark the center line, and then I will draw in the line of the shoulders and the line of the hips. That I find gives me the best proportions. Because a lot of the times when you're just drawing a gesture, it's easy to lose the proportions, but if you mark the shoulders and the hips, it's a lot easier. Okay, so there's my gesture. You can see that the lines are not outlines. They are just the center lines and the action line. So that's the gesture part, and then we can fill it in. We are going to be focusing on shapes. Don't worry so much about the details.
So when I draw arms and legs, I always just try to draw them as tapered cylinders. Arm and leg anatomy tends to look really complicated with all the muscles wrapping around them, so ignore all those bumps and curves and just draw shapes or forms at this point. I also have an entire video on how to draw torsos, which I'll link below. When I'm drawing feet, I think of super simple shapes like flippers or wedges. His hand looks like a diamond shape. So take the opportunity now to check your negative space. I can see here my negative space is a little too small. It looks okay, but I'm kind of missing his lean. He's slightly leaning forward more. So I can catch these things and fix my proportions before I move on to my line.
So be careful not to make the head too big. It starts to make a person look more childish. Probably want that person to look like an adult.
If you're struggling with proportions, I'll link a tutorial on drawing human proportions young and old that you can watch next.
And then if you've drawn your silhouette, you can actually go in and add more lines to it later.
Okay, so the line phase of the drawing should be the last thing that you do, not the first thing, which is the biggest mistake I see beginners make.
I already had 2 passes, so I drew my action, I drew my shape, so now I can really focus on my line.
So I'm going to probably start with his hair because it has loads of personality. I'm going to draw along using my shape as a guide. So this is where you get to be really descriptive. You can draw in the details in the face and start to add in those bumps and curves from the muscles and modify your cylinders into realistic looking arms and legs. If you look at the pros, they know how to draw any pose out of their head because they are able to draw gestures and construct bodies using forms. You may think that's impossible right now, but it's really not. It's just because they understand how the figure is actually constructed, and with some practice, so can you. So if you skip the other 2 steps and just draw the outlines, your chances of good proportions and dynamic drawing are really low, and you're relying solely on the reference image instead of having the freedom to draw poses from imagination. If you'd like to support the channel and the creation of free arts education, become a member on Patreon for behind-the-scenes perks and online classes at Wing Canvas. A tip when you're drawing feet: if you divide the top of the foot into 3 equal sections, one of those sections will be the big toe. I'm not going to spend a ton of time drawing his hands or feet in detail because we're focusing on the actual figure itself. But I'll link some hand and feet anatomy tutorials you can watch later if you want to go down that rabbit hole. So now that I've finished drawing the outlines, I want to add some very simple shading to give it more depth. I go back to the shape phase and try to simplify the approach. I'll quickly shade in key shadows and darker elements like his hair. Key shadows express lighting, mood, and weight, like the shadow here on his arm is a cast shadow which has hard edges. Cast shadows simply mean they are shadows being cast by other objects instead of shadows on the form itself. There's a little bit of lighting coming from his shirt, but I'm going to continue that shadow all the way down to simplify things. I'm not going to add too much shading to it, but I did end up redrawing and shading this demo on toned paper for my art mentorship class. Leave a comment for me down below if you'd like to see a tutorial on how to draw and shade realistic figures on toned paper. I know I made it seem easy, but in practice, progress may seem slow. And if you think your drawings suck, don't worry, they're supposed to suck in the beginning. Mine did too, and it took many years of practice, learning from great instructors, and getting critiques on my artwork that made me confident in my anatomy drawing skills. So be sure to check out the links in the description for more resources on figure drawing.
Join a virtual class to learn live from our professional artists. Get creative assignments, individual guidance, and real-time feedback on your artwork. Start today and level up your practice. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Share it with a fellow art nerd, and if you love receiving quality and free arts education, subscribe. Here are some other videos you can check out next.